Hello, High Point Church in Knoxville. I'm Mike Licona. You may not know me, but my daughter is Allie Peters, and my son-in-law is Nick Peters. I'm a professor of New Testament at Houston Baptist University. I did my PhD work in New Testament studies, and I've specialized in historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. So Easter is a special holiday for me because I've studied it extensively. Let me give you just a couple of facts here that are granted by virtually all scholars who studied the subject, including skeptical ones like atheists, agnostic, Jewish scholars, and liberal Christians. Virtually all scholars who study the subject in this relevant field agree that Jesus died by crucifixion. Number two, that shortly after his death, a number of Jesus' followers, in fact all the disciples, had experiences in individual and in group settings that they were persuaded was the risen Jesus who had appeared to them. And number three, a persecutor of the church named Paul had an experience that he believed was the risen Jesus appearing to him. Now the task for the historian is to come up with a hypothesis that best explains these facts. The number one alternative hypothesis given by scholars today is that the disciples experienced hallucinations of the risen Jesus. Now, what we know from modern psychology is that only about 7% of the group most likely to experience hallucinations will experience a visual hallucination, only 7%. That we also know through modern psychology is that group hallucinations are extremely rare, if not impossible. Now think about this. When we come to the appearances to the disciples, not 7%, but 100%, an unthinkable 100% had these experiences. Number two, they occurred in at least 3 group settings. The oldest tradition of Jesus' resurrection that we have is in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 3 through 7, and there it has 3 group appearances, to the 12, to more than 500, and to all the apostles. And lastly, you got to think about Paul. He was out persecuting the church. Jesus would have been the last person in the world that Paul would have expected or wanted to see. So the hallucination hypothesis, even though it is the leading hypothesis given by skeptical scholars, it hardly explains anything. It only accounts for Jesus' death by crucifixion, but it doesn't account for anything else. It's really a horrible historical explanation. By contrast, the resurrection hypothesis explains all of it. It explains not only Jesus' death by crucifixion, but the appearances to all the apostles in individual and group settings, and even to the skeptic Paul. So by far, just historically speaking, the resurrection hypothesis is the best historical explanation. And so the Easter event is grounded not just in faith, but also in historical fact. I hope you all have a happy Easter. Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed.
Sings my soul.